Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Power of a PhD, How Anyone Can Use Their PhD to Get Hired in Industry, by Dr. Isaiah Hankel, narrated by Mike Lenz. Foreword. When Isaiah asked me to write the foreword of his book, I found myself enveloped in effervescence. I truly was touched, because Isaiah is a person who has inspired and impressed me since our very first meeting. It certainly helps that I feel he and I have true synergy in our life missions. We both enable people to look ahead, break free from their shackles, transform their lives, and realize their most sought-after goals. Our paths intersected because he knew the power of LinkedIn to conduct a successful job search. Isaiah reached out to me because my business specializes in LinkedIn. My team and I empower professionals through career branding, by building success into their brands and aligning their stories to their goals. By optimizing clients' profiles, opportunity collides with them. I saw early on the professional opportunities available through LinkedIn and how the platform leveled the playing field for every professional, regardless of title or background, in managing reputation, growing their brand, and positioning themselves for their career vision. As I worked with professionals, Isaiah was empowering PhDs to enter into the private sector. He knew LinkedIn was the tool for them to find success. Isaiah created a community of engaged PhDs, hungry to use their education, knowledge, and mental strength and persistence as a competitive edge in a professional world. It was after joining his cheeky scientist association that I began to understand the true depth of what Isaiah was providing to his community. The association was a family of PhDs who spent their lives studying and researching, felt stuck, unsupported, and alone. Isaiah gave them the confidence, motivation, and inspiration, in addition to actual professional training. He provided the PhDs with impetus to change their lives and pivot in a more fruitful direction. These success stories of PhDs who put his advice to use changed their future vision and found new, fulfilling, and well-paying careers outside of academia were inspiring and refreshing. Even though I knew he was guiding and impacting his audience, I never truly understood what was driving his mission. It was during a podcast commercial break when I saw a video interview of Isaiah speaking of his own background as a PhD. He spoke of the hard work he had to put into his career. Regardless of his dedication, there was an extreme lack of support in the academic world. The respect I had for him magnified, realizing that he had once been in his audience's shoes, and now dedicates his life to empowering others so they would not have the negative experience he had, and they could find the right path in order to soar. For you, your doctorate may have been your goal and vision. Know that there is more out there for you, and it's time to pivot, to use all that you have acquired through years of dedication and research in a new way. This book is the tool that will help you take your strengths and abilities and create a new vision, and ultimately, a new future for yourself. Most people do not understand that growth and success are forged because of sustained moments of discomfort, anxiety, and fear. Hopefully, this book will trigger those feelings inside you, which will then lead to your growth and lead you outside your comfort zone and into that next chapter of your life. Keep your eye on the future you envision for yourself. Put your trust in Isaiah. You have the power to determine your story and your future. The fact that you are listening to this forward should tell you that you are ready. It is your time right now to soar high and aim big. You too can live an inspired life. The instructions are right here. Just keep listening. Donna Serdula, founder of Vision Board Media and LinkedIn-Makeover.com, author of LinkedIn Profile Optimization for Dummies. Preface. Why I now feel sorry for my academic advisor. First principle. Never to let oneself be beaten down by persons or by events. Marie Curie, Ph.D. Answer me. I'm the boss, my advisor yelled. The whole lab felt quiet. My advisor yelled again. Answer me right now or I'll write a letter to your department and you'll never get your PhD. At that, the lab next to us fell quiet too. Professor managing the lab next door had closed his office door when my advisor started yelling. At the time, I just thought this other professor didn't want to get involved, but now I see him as one more person scared and broken by the academic system. I sat frozen, completely unable to compute what was happening. My professor stormed over to me, grabbed my arm, and shouted in my face one more time, "Do you understand me?" I meekly said, "Yes, okay." He let go of my arm and walked away. Everyone acted like nothing had happened. I packed up my stuff and left the lab for the day. I went to the dean's office, but he only acted surprised by the incident and didn't seem to be able to offer much help. A common problem. That incident with my professor was not isolated. The lack of accountability with no system for correcting poor management, let alone bullying, harassment, or other extreme cases of inappropriate behavior, was a common problem I ran into in academia repeatedly. A report by Nature defines this problem clearly. The feudal master-servant relationship existing between a PhD supervisor and his or her student has another facet seldom broached by academics. That is bullying. Employment legislation prohibits bullying at work. But because PhDs are not salaried or contracted, they are not legally employees, and so are vulnerable to capricious supervisors. A report by The Guardian further explains why this problem has continued over the past 15 years. In other industries, the human resources departments are really strong on bullying, and if there is any accusation of bullying, it's taken seriously. But in academia, there's a culture that the line manager or head of department has absolute power. They can make or break your career, and people very rarely get help. I have spent several years working for a drug company, and there the climate was much more professional. You were trained to look after the people in your group, and to look out for any warning signs. Universities are 10 or 20 years behind. A few weeks after my advisor's outbursts, I received an email from him informing me that a date had been set for my thesis defense, and there was no need to come back to the lab. The entire downward spiral with my advisor happened because I wanted to get an industry job, and I challenged my professor's authority. Like a lot of PhDs, I thought this was my fault. I thought I was alone. Later, I found that what I experienced was extremely common, a result of an academic system that was systemically failing PhD students like me all around the world. And not only was the system failing me and other PhD students, but it was also failing PhDs across the entirety of academia, including postdoctoral researchers, postdocs, and professors like my advisor. James Lane Allen, an American novelist from Transylvania University, once wrote, "Adversity does not build character, it reveals it." The adversity my advisor was facing exposed his poor character, nothing more or less. As PhDs, we all face moments of weakness, in which the pressure of academia and the poverty-level compensation for our efforts break us temporarily. What happened the day I left the lab wasn't entirely my advisor's fault. After all, he was older and was brought up in academia during a different time. In the 1970s, over 70% of professors would go on to get tenure, and 80% of faculty were full-time. Considering that, he couldn't fathom why anyone would complete a PhD program only to leave academia. He told me I was a foolish failure for wanting to leave academia. Therefore, I was not worth his time. He hadn't come to terms with how much the world had changed since he got his PhD. During my last year of graduate school, I remember reading a report by the Royal Society that found that only 0.45% of PhDs now become full-time professors. I thought, what? How is this possible? Why am I here then? Am I chasing something that won't exist in a few years? The answer I arrived at was yes, as the data I continued finding told a darker and darker story. The failure of academia. The average graduate student across all fields now takes 8.2 years to get their PhD and is 33 years old by the time they defend. Up to 80% of those PhDs end up unemployed or in low-paying postdoc and teaching assistant positions, which, according to the government, are training positions rather than real employment. The average time spent in postdoc positions has swelled from just 1 year to anywhere from 6 to 10 years, what is now referred to as chasing postdocs. Worse still is that universities have started to hide how many postdocs they have by labeling senior postdocs as non-faculty staff or research associates, even though the PhDs in these positions continue to get paid very poorly without access to any retirement benefits, or, in some cases, health care. Full-time professorships have been replaced by poorly paid professor in title-only, part-time, adjunct, and contract professorships, which is why the New York Times recently dubbed academia as adjunctotopia. PhDs have gone from being revered experts the world relies on to invisible laborers, trapped in a pyramid scheme supporting only a handful of full-time professors. This is why there is, as the Boston Globe frames it, a glut of PhDs, which has resulted in, as Policy Opinions Politics describes it, a PhD employment crisis that is systemic and can't be fixed. It's also why so many PhDs dream of transitioning out of academia, even though they have no idea how to do so. To my academic advisor, it was unimaginable that a PhD, as deep into their academic career as I was, would not want to be a professor. When he was in graduate school, professors were untouchable. They could do and say anything they wanted. They could call postdocs dumb, threaten to fire international PhDs and have them deported, and yell at graduate students with no repercussions. He withstood this behavior from his professors, and it was his turn to be on the other end of it. Most professors could get tenure when he was in graduate school, and it was a near impossibility to get fired for anything, ever. Things were different by the time I came through graduate school. My advisor didn't want to see it, but he knew what was happening. He knew academia was failing systemically, and everything he had invested in was crumbling around him. I used to want to be my advisor. For the first 2 years of graduate school, I wanted to be just like my advisor. I started graduate school in 2006 with one of the largest entering classes of PhD students at the university. I quickly found a lab that was doing exciting research and started spending 18-hour days there. Seriously, 18-hour days. I was so eager to impress my professor that I stayed in the lab until he went home. The second day I was in the lab, I got there at 8 a.m. and stayed until 2 a.m. the next morning. In retrospect, that was a horrible decision. After I did that, I was expected to work until at least 10 p.m. every night. But I didn't mind the work because it was all new and exciting. At the time, my advisor was happy. He had just gotten his first research project grant, R01, funded a year earlier. He was running a new lab, and government funding was still relatively high. The future looked bright. My advisor was not only happy at the time, but his behavior was positive, logical, and alluring. He seemed to know everything. He had money and seemingly had power. He was buying new instruments left and right, and he let us buy whatever reagents we wanted. It was like he didn't have a care in the world. He would buy us at least 6 pizzas from the best pizza shop in town at every lab meeting, and we would talk about everyone's research and tell jokes. Everyone got along great. Who wouldn't want this life? That's when I knew I wanted to be just like my advisor. Of course, that changed after being exposed to who my advisor was under stress. Fast forward 2 years, and everyone at our university was dealing with the financial crash of 2008. Labs throughout the university were shutting down, and grant funding was at an all-time low. Even tenured professors were getting pushed out of their positions because universities couldn't afford to pay them. My advisor's most recent $1.25 million R01 grant proposal had just been denied for the second time. He had invested in a project that was going nowhere. His lab was a mess by his own doing, and he was up for tenure in a matter of months. Things were grim. The scene was very similar to what occurred during and after the 2020 pandemic. The same scene will play out repeatedly in academia in response to any and every economic fallout the world sees, because higher education is built on a house of cards. The house? Cheap PhD labor. The cards? Poor PhDs. PhDs are indentured servants, and universities are their masters. Don't believe me? Universities have banded together multiple times to fight governments against giving PhDs and postdoctoral positions overtime pay. Think about that. The postdoc position did not exist 50 years ago. It was an experiment that was meant to provide 1 year, yes, just 1 year, of extra training for PhDs who wanted to run a lab. Likewise, teaching assistant, TA positions have been completely abused. PhDs now commonly spend 5 to 10 years in teaching assistant positions. Academia failed my advisor, just like it failed me. His only hope was to squeeze every last drop of work out of me and the other PhDs working in his lab. Through lack of accountability, people management training, and support systems, academia had turned my advisor into a frantic, narrowly focused bully who couldn't control his emotions. I honestly believe I would have turned out the same way had I spent 10 years in a postdoc position like he did. Fortunately, I transitioned into an industry career instead. After transitioning into industry, I quickly became grateful that I didn't turn out like my advisor. In fact, I started to feel sorry for him. Not for who he was personally, but for who he had allowed himself to become professionally. Narrowly trained in a few niche areas and completely untrained in numerous crucial areas that could have made his career and the careers of those he mentored successful. His lack of management, leadership, and even financial training, as well as his complete lack of professional awareness at the time, became a cautionary tale for me. A tale that I want to pass on to you so you can reclaim control over your own professional career before it's too late. Growing industry jobs versus the decline of academia. One of the reasons my advisor was so stressed after the 2008 financial crash was because he had blown a large percentage of his grant funding in 2006 and 2007. He wasn't tracking his spending well and was clueless when it came to simple financial concepts, like how to read and react to a profit and loss statement. My advisor was a poor leader because neither he nor his academic institution cared about his ability to manage people or finances. He was brought up in a system that rewarded his technical skills and completely ignored his transferable skills, or lack thereof. Academia gave him titles like academic advisor and mentor, without testing his ability to advise or mentor. Ultimately, my advisor believed that being able to end the careers of postdocs or graduate students 15 years his junior made him powerful. He believed that making someone cry or calling someone dumb was winning. He also believed that he was being paid well for doing noble, cutting-edge work, when, in fact, his salary was far less than the average PhD gets paid in industry, and his work wasn't noble or cutting-edge. There's nothing noble about being paid less than your worth to do work that requires you to constantly beg for funding. There's nothing cutting-edge about piecing together just enough data to get the next grant funded, and then using that grant funding to work on something other than what the grant was supposed to fund, because you already know that the data you put in the proposal won't lead to any substantial or translational discoveries. In today's world, the biggest discoveries are made, and the best salaries are paid in industry. While academic postdocs, TAs, and overworked adjunct faculty continue to pile up and full-time faculty positions continue to decline, PhD salaries and opportunities in industry continue to climb. My advisor was part of a system that was and is slowly dying, and I don't envy the decline. I feel sorry for it and motivated by it. I'm motivated to help as many PhDs as possible know the truth about what's possible for their careers and lives outside of academia. I'm motivated to encourage PhDs, perhaps like you, who have become disillusioned, isolated, or even abused by academia, to know that they and their PhDs are incredibly valuable in history. My dream for this book is that it helps you remember your value as a PhD, shows you all the opportunities available to you in industry, and helps you seize the best opportunity for you. Introduction: How PhDs can transition out of academia. Do not let your fire go out, spark by irreplaceable spark, in the hopeless swamps of the not quite, the not yet, and the not at all. Do not let the hero in your soul perish in lonely frustration for the life you deserved and have never been able to reach. The world you desire can be won. It exists. It is real. It is possible. It's yours. Ayn Rand. In the preface, I only scratched the surface of why PhDs want to transition out of academia. Many PhDs feel professionally unfulfilled in academic positions because they are overworked, work in uninspiring roles, and are paid marginal academic stipends, fellowships, and wages. Far too many PhDs are unable to find meaning or joy in their academic careers, which negatively impacts both their professional and personal lives. But most of these PhDs face a lack of training for how to get a job outside of academia. After all, most PhDs have spent decades, the entirety of their professional careers, in academia. They also face imposter syndrome. After spending their lives in academia, many PhDs think they can't be successful in industry. They falsely believe that their lack of post-PhD industry experience removes them from consideration for top industry roles. But nothing could be further from the truth. The Fourth Industrial Revolution. The World Economic Forum recently labeled today's industry landscape as the Fourth Industrial Revolution. According to the forum, the top 3 skills employers recruit for are complex problem-solving, critical thinking, and creativity. In other words, employers need job candidates who can correctly identify problems, find the right problems to solve, and then solve those problems with creative solutions. Guess what? PhDs like you excel in all 3 of those areas. Never forget that, regardless of your PhD background, you are an expert researcher. You are highly trained in identifying problems and creating solutions to those problems. Think of all the hours, days, weeks, months, and years, even decades, you spent trying to find answers to the world's toughest questions. You know how to attack questions from every angle. You know how to follow a lead through 15 academic journal articles, 8 book references, and countless plots and obscure, barely readable figures published 10 or more years ago just to, maybe, prove some minuscule aspect of your overall hypothesis. Employers deeply value this for any industry role. Make sure they know you have these skills. Employers also value your ability to wrangle uncertainty. If you have a PhD or are getting a PhD, you've probably spent years of your life smack in the middle of uncertainty. You have no idea if your next grant is going to be funded. You have no idea if your paper is going to get past that 3rd reviewer and be published. You have no idea when your committee is going to give you the green light to defend your thesis. you don't even know if the project you're working on has an answer at all. Everything you're doing, your life's work, could be proven untrue at any time. As a PhD, you're not just comfortable with uncertainty, you thrive on it. You know that without uncertainty, discovery would be impossible. Innovation wouldn't exist. Most people don't understand the relationship between uncertainty and creation. You do. Most people want a sure thing and spend their entire lives choosing unhappiness over uncertainty. Use this to your advantage by leaning into your ability to work through uncertainty toward innovation. Make sure you communicate it to your employers, too. One of my thesis committee members once told me the difference between leaving graduate school with a master's degree versus leaving with a PhD is that a master's degree is granted to those who have mastered a field, while a PhD is granted to those who have added to a field. Less than 2% of the population has a PhD, because adding to a field is hard. Anyone can regurgitate information. That's easy. It's so much harder to create information, to bring new knowledge into existence for the very first time. If you have a PhD, you are a creator of information. This is one of your most valuable and most transferable skills. Don't assume that everyone can create information. Most job candidates can't even write a book report. You, on the other hand, have spent years creating information and months putting it into a 100-page story called a thesis, just so 5 other people can read it. This kind of innovation and tenacity is uncommon and should be communicated to every employer you approach. PhDs also learn faster than any other group of people. This is because PhDs are rigorously taught how to learn. After all, the acronym PhD stands for a Doctor of Philosophy, and philosophy stands for knowledge and the ability to ascertain knowledge, which makes PhDs quite literally doctors of learning. Your ability to learn quickly, especially on the job, is incredibly valuable to employers. It's also exceptionally rare. Just watch the average job candidate try to learn a new software program or standard operating procedure, SOP. Then watch a PhD learn that same software program or SOP. The speed at which the PhD learns, as well as the autonomous nature of their learning, is unmatched. Speed of learning is a competitive advantage that frightens other job candidates. This fear is often expressed through misinformation, like you're overqualified if you have a PhD, or PhDs are lab rats who can't understand business, or you can't get a job without industry experience. Don't believe those lies. Your ability to learn quickly should not only be communicated to employers, but should also be leveraged to implement what you learn in this book. The ability of PhDs to learn quickly is, in large part, responsible for my success in helping hundreds of thousands of PhDs get hired into their dream industry careers. I've helped PhDs transition into all 11 sectors of business as defined by the S&P 500 Index, including information technology, healthcare, communication services, consumer discretionary, financials, industrial, consumer staples, utilities, real estate, materials, and energy. Feeling blind in terms of your industry transition, feeling stuck in academia with no idea how to change your circumstances, or feeling as though you are begging to get hired or begging to get promoted to your next industry position does not have to be your professional experience. As a PhD, you have the value necessary to be sought after by industry employers throughout your career. Your guidebook to success. Whether you want to be one of the highest-paid chief scientific officers or medical directors in your field, or the most sought-after data scientist, project manager, product manager, principal scientist, senior engineer, user experience researcher, application scientist, technical sales specialist, or clinical research associate in your
Sample complete. Ready to continue?